So let's just jump right into it. So we're going to be talking about the new social learning. We want to talk about social learning and its impact on the training industry per se, or learning and development, whatever terms people use for it. So, as the co-author of the new social learning, which is now in its second edition, how is it that you define social learning, and what do you think people still are missing?
I'm surprised how often people say to me they still don't really understand what it is. So when I hear that, I often think that people are trying too hard. They're trying to overthink this. It's really the act of joining together to make sense of new ideas, of creating something new, of working with other people to understand the world around us. That's not necessarily a training or learning specific. That's how we actually take in information and we use it for what is important to us in the world around us. I guess that what people really have the hardest time seeming to wrap their heads around, though, is it's really not a delivery system. It's not like classroom training or e-learning or even mobile learning. It's more of an approach to sharing and discovering the whole array of options, frankly, some of which aren't technological at all. They're human. They're how we interact as people and what we gain along the way. Social learning is really almost a fundamental shift in the way that we work. Now we can use these more humanizing social media tools. It allows us to accelerate our reach, to get more people together, to work together, and hopefully, in the ideal scenario, we create organizations in the world that we want to live in because we can connect with people and learn when we need to, the things that we need to learn.
This obviously begs the question, and I've heard it asked many times: what happens to the training department with social learning?
Well, I think it's an important question for us all to be asking about every organization, every department in an organization, which is how are the new modern tools, the new modern practices affecting and changing what we do? But we don't necessarily think, oh, we should do away with the accounting department now that we have spreadsheets, for example. Instead, the technology allows to extend our reach beyond the confines of any one department or the control of any one group. What really happens is that because of the use of social media tools, for example, that people can be learning in many ways beyond and in addition to the training department. I find it very rare to come across an organization that is in a position to do away with their training department. That's really a silly concept because there are absolutely areas that it makes sense when one group or one department actually can share information that other people wouldn't have. It couldn't just be curated by whomever has that information, but it makes sense to centralize that and for one group to be able to share that information. But if they're doing it well, they will also be listening and learning what other people know across the organization to make that information sharing richer, more diverse, and be able to grow with the modern times. So it's not just one group, but it's almost imbuing of the information with every group so that people can be learning across the organization.
It obviously it changes a lot within our organizations. And the other question I would say that I get asked a lot is, so how does this impact instructional design? What then does instructional design do or become when social learning becomes more of a norm?
Well, I have to admit, and having run a number of education organizations over the years, the term instructional design has always befuddled me a little bit. And I say that because if you, I'm a writer. I'm a late in life writer. I think my teachers in school would have just never believed that I would become a writer as an adult. But what instructional designers are, for all practical purposes, are writers. They're writing instruction. And the fact is that there are people probably throughout the entire organization who are also writing instruction. They may not be schooled in the same way. They may not be using the same templates or the same approaches or the same design approach, but there are many wonderful approaches to conveying information from one person to another. I find some of the most incredible educational content comes from teenagers on YouTube. And I find it highly unlikely that they really thought about the approach other than what the people who were watching that video needed to know and what it is that would change their behavior as a result of being engaging and fun and interesting. So it's not, I believe, that instructional design per se has to go away. But what if instead we thought of the people in our organization as writers? Just like there are screenwriters, there are script writers, there are short story writers. There are people who convey information through words, and some of them can be shared verbally, they can be talked about, and others can be written down for people to read. Not only do I think that that would widen people's understanding of what instructional designers did, they would understand that they're writers who write instruction to be shared with other people. But it would also it would expand not only the way we think about it, but it would expand our approaches, and we'd realize that there are those scripts or stories or those pieces that come together as just as a part of the way people work and have been working for hundreds of for a very long time.
So, so as obviously as you've experienced in your previous roles within corporate training, right? There's a legacy of training and processes and systems within corporate America. And so the question that always comes up, another one, is measurement. If we're going to be doing this social learning and if we're going to be relying on it and really thinking that there's value, the question is always asked and covered a lot in conferences and blogs everywhere. How do we measure this stuff? How do we know we're getting value from it in the related to the same ways that we used to measure traditional training?
Well, I would push against that and suggest that I'm not so sure that the ways we have traditionally measured training are actually showing that we're providing value to the organization. I think that's why some of those questions are still asked as to how we're measuring this. So let's be really clear about that. And to be extra clear about it, what I mean is that by showing that somebody has attended a training class or has worked through an e-learning system or has downloaded a module or an app or logged into an LMS doesn't really show in any way, shape, or form that they are going to work differently, that they're going to understand something at a level that they can that they will change their behavior. And so before I even go down the path of how social learning might change those metric systems, let's be really clear that the way we've done it in the past is more because that's how we could, not necessarily how we should. And so what these tools allow us to do is begin to start looking at how people are working, what they are paying attention to, what they are engaged with, how many people they are influencing. Those are the types of metrics every senior leader I've worked with for the last 20 years is truly interested in. They're far more interested in attention and engagement and influence than they are in knowing how many people attended something or were able to complete a quiz in a certain period of time. Don't get me wrong, I understand why there's compliance training, for example, to just show that you have given the opportunity for everybody to learn the same information. And those can be done in the exact same way they've always been done. But what these tools allow us to do is to understand, to be able to gauge, to be able to dig into how we are providing value to one another and how we are working with one another to be able to do more. And that's never been able to be done before in a simple, easy to use, inexpensive, and pretty fun way to do it. So I think it's it's a big movement forward. So much so, here's I guess my big plug for the book, is that chapter 5 of the second edition of the New Social Learning is all about metrics. The entire chapter, we have over 30 different ways to measure social learning. the interactions that people have between them. They're all lightweight. Some of them can be done completely free of charge. Others are pointing you to tools that can be easily downloaded. And I would encourage everyone to think outside of their four-step evaluation process by thinking about some of the newer, more modern, more interesting, and frankly, more relevant ways of looking at how we are learning and how we are learning together.
Awesome. I can, you and I, of course, can chat for a very long time together, and we have, but I'm running out of time, and so I'm going to have to plug the book one more time. It's New Social Learning, and they can also read about you at marciaconner.com, I believe, correct?
Yes.
And so before
Twitter. There's use social media too. I'm Marcia, Marcia on Twitter, and that's actually I think the same on Facebook and LinkedIn, and Marcia Conner on LinkedIn. But yeah, there's many ways for people to reach me directly, especially using these tools. I'm first and foremost a learner, and I love learning with and for other people.
Silly of me to forget that part. So let me ask one quick closing question that I like to ask. What is the one book that you like to recommend the most, whether it's the one of all time or the one just most recently?
Well, I don't think I could pull off the all-time, and I'm not even sure the most recent is the most useful in this case. But I am a huge fan of a book by Warren Bennis that I find very few in the education field have read, and that's called Organizing Genius. And he pulls together 10 examples of teams that have come together and learned and worked with one another to, frankly, change the world. It's not only written beautifully and in interesting ways, you get to learn how things have actually changed our society, our world, that you may not even know about before. And so I think it really expands our thinking, and I encourage everybody to read it. Absolutely love the book. But you asked me about the most recent, and I have to point out I have an 11-year-old son, and one of the things that we do together is that we love speculative science fiction, something I never was into before at all. But I am finding not only some amazing writers and amazing books. The one I'll plug really quickly is Ready Player One by Ernest Cline, because it actually takes a look at how learning might be different in the future. Actually, not the learning itself. I think that how we take in information is actually going to be pretty darn similar, but the dissemination of, the sharing of information, how schooling might be different, how training might be different. And that seems to be a consistent theme in speculative fiction, which I find to be so enlightening and just gives me some ideas of things I hadn't thought about before. So when I see people looking at new technologies, I can imagine how they might happen in the future, and that future may not be that far into the future. It may be just right around the corner, and that's pretty exciting.
Those two are great. Yeah, we talked about those before. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Happy to be here. Happy to talk with you always, Brent.